Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Pedram Shojai. So this is a Gateway to Health podcast. Again, I keep announcing this. I have my health brand, the Gateway to Health, where I'm going to do these types of conversations. This is where you're going to find these. So if you're into the health, wellness, weight loss, all that stuff, this is where I'm going to put those. And then the mindfulness, personal development stuff will stay under the Urban Monk. Just letting you know how things are getting organized over here. Dr. Scott Sherr today. Great guy. I didn't know him, and now I love him. And when I read about him, I said, yeah, let's get him on. I like this conversation. The sympathetic spiral of doom. A lot of people are on it. And this really ugly place that a lot of us have gone to, where our sympathetic nervous system is really activated. Therefore, our mitochondria try to crank more energy, but they don't have what it takes to sustain that. And so our energy goes down, our stress goes up, and we can't heal. Yeah, this is something we've been talking about for a very long time. He really nails it in the way he describes it. You need to listen to this. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast. We're talking about a subject that is near and dear to my heart, which is kind of a weird thing to say. It's my love language when we're talking about the sympathetic spiral of doom. But man, it's a real issue, and I love that you're tackling it. So welcome. Guys, how'd you get in all this? What drove you into making this kind of the center of your thesis?
Pedram, thank you for having me. It's really cool to be here. And I think that what it comes down to is that we all live in this world. It's called now. And this now is extremely stressful for most of us. We live in a culture that really gives accolades for doing more and sleeping less. And when I was in medical school, my colleagues, my friends and I in medical school had shirts that made sleep is for quitters, right? So, you'll sleep when you're dead kind of thing. And so I've been a part of this culture. I grew up in New York, not New York City, but the Long Island. And I grew up the son of a chiropractor, actually. So very out of the box, very much didn't know anything about conventional medicine until I ended up deciding to go to conventional medical school and get my own training and figure out things from there. But he also worked really hard. He was up at 4:00 in the morning and he was back home at 8:00 at night in his chiropractic practice. But he's also one of those 1% to 5% of people in the world that doesn't need to sleep more than 4 or 5 hours a night and still have a very productive following day. But that's certainly not me. And so over the years, Pedram, I created my own integrative practice. I have my own telemedicine practice now outside of Boulder. And I aligned with the missions of a friend and colleague and now mentor named Dr. Ted Atracoso, who started this nonprofit called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. We incorporated that in 2017, where we're looking to create education for practitioners on how to optimize our patient and clients' health, the perspective shift from disease to health, which was super cool because it really did align from my chiropractic upbringing as well. And so we have a 7-module certification for practitioners to do that. And then out of that, it was like, when you're trying to optimize health, you need to help people right now along that path. Is you want to feel better tomorrow. But if it took you 50 or 60 years or however many years to get to where you are, you can't expect that tomorrow you're going to be optimized. It just doesn't work that way. However, if you can find things along the path to help people get through that path or optimize that path as best as they can, then they can get to those optimization strategies and see them significantly benefit them over the long term. And that's where we decided on really focusing on this sympathetic spiral of doom to take you there. Because the sympathetic spiral of doom is one of these things where, as a clinician, I know almost immediately if somebody comes to see me that they're in this spiral. They come in, they're super stressed, they're wired but tired. Nothing they're doing is helping. They're trying to do more, but they find that the more they do, the less they actually can do. And so that's where the sympathetic spiral of doom really came from.
A lot of this has to do with mitochondria, right? And the ability for us to output energy. And so I'd love to have you couple those so people understand how the sympathetic nervous system, the function of mitochondria are so intimately woven.
Yeah, so this is a great question because when you're in fight or flight all the time, this is the sympathetic nervous system. So for those, I'm sure that many of your listeners know this already, but a brief primer there that we have what's called our autonomic nervous system. And we have either our sympathetic part of that and our parasympathetic part. The sympathetic part is it's our fight or flight part of our nervous system. It's supposed to help us run away from something that's chasing us and not die. It's it's getting our children safe if they're in danger. And then we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest, digest, detoxification, and recover nervous system. But unfortunately, as I was describing earlier, most of us are living in this sort of sympathetic dominance most of the time. And when you're in this sympathetic activation all the time, you're releasing hormones and neurotransmitters that are trying to get your body and your brain to actually make more energy at all times. And what happens when this happens, you have what they're called your catecholamines, norepinephrine and epinephrine, for example, dopamine as well. You have your cortisol, which is your hormone, your stress steroid hormone. What these do is they go and try to help your cells make more energy. And this is the part of your cell called your mitochondria. And the mitochondria are trying to make energy, and they're being told by the system to make all this additional energy. And what happens is when you make energy in the mitochondria, it's not free. We're not an electric powered car. We're more like a gasoline powered car. So we make what's called ATP, or energy currency, but we also make what are called reactive oxygen species, or free radicals as well. And the body has a neutralization mechanism. It's called having antioxidants in the body. But what can happen is that once you have too much energy being made, the system doesn't have enough antioxidants in the body. Over time, they get depleted. And then you start getting this stress response that happens from the mitochondria, where they go into what's called the cell danger response. The cell danger response is a full systemic response, but the cell danger response really manifests as a way of actually you're producing less energy. The body is trying to protect itself. And by doing that, it's putting out stress signals to help you try to actually activate your sympathetic nervous system so that you can find more places to make more energy. And so it becomes a sort of very vicious cycle where you can either start with mitochondrial dysfunction itself, like from a toxin exposure, from an infection, from like even a medication, for example. And then this can cause a sympathetic activation, then spirals down to more mitochondrial dysfunction. Or it can start with this sympathetic activation with the fight or flight happening because of stress in your environment. Say it's a toxic relationship, a toxic partner, or you have a toxic work environment, or you had trauma as a child and you've never felt safe. And all of that then stimulates that mitochondria to have to work harder, causing mitochondrial dysfunction over time too. So it's a chicken before the egg scenario, where you can start off with the sympathetic activation causing mitochondrial dysfunction, which worsens the sympathetic activation, or you can start off with the mitochondrial dysfunction that causes sympathetic activation that causes more mitochondrial dysfunction. So this spiral loop is very difficult to break if you don't think about breaking it both on the sympathetic activation side of things as well as supporting mitochondria at the same time.
It's funny. I love this, by the way. The vision that came to mind that I think is appropriate for something like this is you left the car running in a closed garage and the exhaust is choking out the system. And so a lot of us go, okay, yeah, I don't feel right. Let me rev the gas here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Therein lies the problem, right? You have to create an offshoot. You have to clear this. So many people, so many patients that I've had over the years are stuck in this spiral.
Yeah.
How do you go about unraveling this? There's so many systems involved that I'm sure it's complicated. Everyone's looking for a simple answer. I don't need a simple answer, but let's walk through it.
Sure. The first thing to understand as a clinician, and I've been in this situation, I'm sure you have as well, Pedram, where you're giving people all the right things. You're giving them the right supplements, you're changing their diet, like they're drinking better water, whatever it might be, but nothing changes no matter what you do, or very little. And that is a very reflective of this sympathetic activation, because if you're always clamped down, if you're always in fight or flight, there's no amount of supplementation specifically for the mitochondria, for example, that I can give you that's often going to be able to give you the relief and the result that you want. And that's the first thing to always mention. So when somebody comes to see me and they're clamped down like this, I know that there's nothing I can do until I start helping them unclamp that sympathetic activation. But the key when you're unclamping that sympathetic activation is that you're not forgetting about the mitochondria at the same time, because they've been stressed for such a long period of time. If you unclamp that sympathetic activation, but you're not focused on that mitochondrial function support at the same time, you're going to be leaving somebody that has less stress, but still feels wasted because they don't have that support. So when I'm thinking about this I really do think about the sympathetic activation primarily first, because I know that's such a big piece here. And when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this both in the short term and in the long term, because we want to have them feel what it feels like to have not that sympathetic activation be running the show. And that typically is when I look at what's called the GABA system. GABA is our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in our brains. It's called gamma aminobutyric acid. And so people know the superstar neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, but they don't know about glutamate and GABA. Glutamate is your primary excitatory neurotransmitter, not the other ones. And then GABA is your primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. And what's interesting is that glutamate is actually converted into GABA in the brain. And so there's a fine and delicate balance between your glutamate and your GABA at all times. And just these two neurotransmitters are 80% of your brain's neurotransmission. And so the other ones are just the 20%. And so there's always a balance between the glutamate and GABA until there isn't. When you have sympathetic activation all the time, you're going to deplete that GABA pretty dramatically. And when GABA deficiency or GABA depletion is associated with anxiety, with depression, with insomnia, with tremors, with mental health disorders. And so if you go to your doctor, one of us, for example, in the conventional world, and say, hey, doctor, I have anxiety or depression, what are you going to get? You're often going to get an SSRI, like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, right? But we know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency. In fact, there's some recent meta-analysis, I'm sure you probably saw these, Pedram, where, in medical school, I learned that if somebody was depressed, they had low serotonin levels, and that's why SSRIs and these drugs worked. But we now know that there's no evidence that the people with depression have any lower levels of depression of serotonin compared to those who don't have depression. Now, artificially increasing serotonin can be helpful in some people, although there is a black box warning on all of these SRIs and things like that, because the increased suicidality that happens in the first several weeks. In fact, I know the lady who got that black box warning on the label because her sister died of suicide after she started an SSRI back in the mid 1990s. So we know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency. There's much better evidence that depression is a GABA deficiency in many cases. But we know that's not what you're immediately going to get when you go to your primary care doctor. I remember working in primary care, and I was working with an older physician my first year out of residency, and everybody that had anxiety, everybody that had fatigue, everybody that had depression, they all got SSRIs at that point. And so the GABA system is the unsung hero, is what it comes down to. It's the waylay station. It's our sensory gate. And what I mean by that is that it helps gate information that comes into your awareness. Okay. I think most of us know that we're not processing all the information that's coming into your environment at all times. Our brain is always making assumptions about what's around us. And this is called one of the generative theories of how our brain works. But in essence, the GABA system is that it's a sensory gate, so we don't bring in all that information. If you have that system not working very well, you can get overwhelmed. And do you know, I don't know if you know this fact, do you know how many thoughts we have every single day on average? Pedram, do you have a sense of that? There's ranges, but on average, it's typically around 70,000 thoughts per day is what's estimated. And that's on an average human, right? It doesn't mean like it's the same. It doesn't mean it's a different thought every single time. It just means you're having about 70,000 thoughts per day. But when you're anxious, when you're depressed, this goes up to about 120,000 thoughts per day. This is all regulated by the GABA system. So I think about various ways you can enhance and increase the GABA system now as a way to give people a sense of what the parasympathetic nervous system used to feel like.
Scott, sadly, what is happening as we're talking is someone listening to this went on Amazon and ordered glutamate and said, dude said glutamate fixes this. All right. No. Because right. And so this is what people do is like they're looking for that one supplement that they forgot to buy this week that's going to solve all their problems. So let's talk about, and you mentioned it, there's a dynamic balance in the system will push to GABA, but glutamate's excitatory and GABA is inhibitory. I just want people, because people just run with stuff too fast and they're not listening to what you're actually saying. So I really want to tease this part out.
Yeah, beautiful. So the best way to describe having too much glutamate is go to a Chinese restaurant and have MSG in your food. How do you feel afterwards? So it's not as common, but I remember as a kid, I remember my father was very sensitive to this. So we'd go to a Chinese restaurant, he'd come home and he'd have terrible headaches. He'd feel irritable. He was grumpy. He couldn't sleep, anxious. These are all signs of glutamate overload, right? So you have to be very careful on how you support the GABA system. Okay. Because if you give somebody glutamate, for example, they oftentimes will have these kinds of symptoms. So we have these cofactors, we have enzymes that convert many different things in the body to many different things, right? But here in this case, glutamate is converted to GABA using an enzyme called glutamate decarboxylase, and cofactors magnesium and B6. So how many of those that are listening are magnesium deficient? The majority of people are magnesium deficient. How many people are B6 deficient? The majority of people are B6 deficient as well. So you want to think, the way I think about this clinically is that there's all these pathways that are required in the body to make your GABA. So you can take in sources of glutamate, just like MSG. on this caviar. There's like hard cheeses. There's other things that have a lot of glutamate in there. You can also get glutamate by converting from glutamine, an amino acid, to glutamate in the body. So glutamine is an amino acid. It's one of our primary amino acids in the body. It's actually the primary fuel of your small intestine, actually. And so if you have a leaky gut, for example, you need more glutamine to heal it. And oftentimes I find actually, what's interesting is that you can give somebody some glutamine initially and it's healing their gut, but you give them too much glutamine, it turns into too much glutamate, and then they have too much glutamate that has a hard time converting into GABA in the brain. So I think this mechanistically, I think about it mechanistically all the time in this capacity, because you want to think about the cofactors and the precursors that are responsible for giving you more GABA. The other thing to be on really is to be also hammer home about the don't go out and just buy a supplement thing here, is that GABA itself as a supplement, GABA is too big of a molecule to get across into the brain. The blood-brain barrier keeps many things out, but GABA is too big to get across. If you take a GABA supplement and it works for you, it's often because your blood-brain barrier is leaky. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. It's allowing things across that shouldn't get across. And this is diagnostic actually for a leaky gut along with a leaky brain. And so what I've seen in my clinical practice is like somebody's taking GABA supplements and they're feeling nice and relaxed and calm with them because the leaky brain thing is happening. And then we seal up the gut using some glutamine, some other things, of course, and then their GABA supplements stop working. And that's diagnostic on the other end of that, where you've sealed up the gut and now their gut lining and their blood-brain barrier lining are now doing what they're supposed to do. And people think this is like a crazy thing, like a leaky brain, like how could I have a leaky brain? But it's so much more common than we realize. If you've had a severe infection, if you've had severe stress for long periods of time, if you have systemic inflammation in the body, the blood-brain barrier is likely going to not be doing what it's typically going to be doing. If you're taking a GABA supplement and it's working for you, you have to be mindful that it's very likely some additional investigation that you need to do to see why that's the case. There's other ways to support the GABA receptor, and there's lifestyle things that you can do that can be very helpful. There's other supplements and other herbs and plants that could be helpful here too. In the short term, with the hope, like hopefully the long-term idea, which is how can you reassess as to what really can happen from a lifestyle and diet perspective now to help you, and also what's causing the stress in the first place. Again, is it a toxic relationship? Is it a bad work environment? Is it trauma and stress that you've had to address since a child? And can you do some lifestyle and dietary things now? Can you start meditating, for example? Can you work on breath work? Can you do some yoga? You can do some exercises like Qigong and others that can really work on balancing that sympathetic nervous system. But in my experience, it's very difficult for people to start doing that stuff right now without getting the experience of what it is to feel like what it is to have that sympathetic nervous system downshift. And it's one of those things where in the long run, once they can feel what it feels like to downregulate their nervous system, then they can find other ways, maybe not supplementation, to get there over the long term. But I found that there's actually some pretty good supplementation to think about in the short term for people that can support the GABA system while they're over the long term really working on optimizing the reasons why their sympathetic nervous system is activated.
A few thoughts here. One of the things that came up for me is in Chinese medicine, when someone's earth element or digestive capacity is out, the pathological fallout is pensiveness or worry. The 70,000 thoughts becoming 120,000. And it feeds right into that death spiral, if you will. It's now here I am with consuming thoughts that are consuming all my B6, my magnesium, and my glutamate. And my leaky gut is it's like a toilet flushing. And so we've done thousands and thousands of tests now, gut permeability. Listen, it's rare for me to find someone who doesn't have a leaky gut in this world. And you could blame the glyphosate, you could blame the GMOs. There's a lot of places you could point, but all I'm telling you is I see it all day. I see it every day, right? There's a lot of leaky guts out there. And so you got to be delicate, right? You got to be delicate. And so people that are in this spiral of doom are also feeling the doom, right? They're feeling the walls caving in. And they start to lose hope and they start to lose clarity on the path out because they've thrown a few darts, they've missed, and they still feel like shit and they have less energy today than they did yesterday.
Yeah.
And so they're like, man, how can we start tiptoeing our way out of this mess?
So what I try to do first is to give people this experience of what it feels like to not be in fight or flight. This can be really challenging for people though, because once you start bringing them out of that sympathetic fight or flight dominance and bring them down into parasympathetic, you can see people get reactive anxiety to that. They get this sort of reactive, holy shit, my nervous system, I'm supposed to be blah, 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 but now I can't because I'm too relaxed. And it's very important for clinicians and for those that are listening that are going through this to understand that there is a baseline set point change that can take a little bit of time to get used to. And so I like to give people this experience. And so I've found some various supplementation to be helpful here where you can give people just this experience of bringing down the nervous system, but you have to be careful, right? Because people already are self-medicating themselves. And the main thing that many people are self-medicating themselves is with alcohol, right? Alcohol, what it does is it binds to the GABA receptor, that GABA that we've been talking about. And what it does is it binds to a separate site to where GABA binds and increases the affinity for GABA to bind itself. And it binds very tightly. So that's why you feel so good so quickly when you take it. But what over time, as we know, alcohol will deplete GABA. And that's the reason why you get tolerance. You need to take more of it, dependence, so you can't stop it as easily, and withdrawal symptoms, which can kill you if you're not careful. And the same thing goes with benzodiazepines, right? These are your Ativans, your Xanax, your Valiums of the world. These are also binding very tightly to the receptor that cause these same kinds of things that alcohol does. So we don't want people to go out and self-medicate. But there are other plants that I found to be very helpful. One that could be really great is the cannabis plant and the kava plant, right? Cannabis, the non-psychoactive cannabinoids, things like CBD, CBG, CBN, these are all binding to separate sites on the GABA receptor to enhance GABA to bind in a more natural way. So you can get a little bit of that calming down without the risks of the things that I just described for the other medications. And then also kava. Kava has been around for thousands of years in the Pacific Islands, and it's been known to have a calming effect of the GABA receptor as well. The key, though, is the way I think about this is that you also want to think about making sure you're not depleting GABA at the same time if GABA is already depleted in these patients and people. And so I have a couple compounds that I like. One called B3 GABA. Actually, B3 GABA is a compound that it's a GABA that's attached to a B3, and B3 is able to get across into the brain in either case, whether the blood-brain barrier is good or not. And then there's a little bit of B3 in the brain, a little bit of GABA in the brain, and that's mildly activating while it's also supporting the GABA system because B3 is mildly activating and the GABA is going to be calming you down. But then that also is great because you get this sort of calm relaxation. Another one that I like is called agarin, which is from a psychedelic mushroom. It's called the fly agaric or the amanita mushroom. Have you heard of the amanita before? It's the most famous. It's the one with the red cap and white spots. It's Santa Claus lore. It has Christmas mythology in there, along with Alice in Wonderland and, of course, Mario Brothers. But what's nice about this particular compound, it's not psychedelic. It's very safe. At low doses, it actually binds to where GABA binds on the receptor. So you can use it especially for sleep because sleep is a big lever here for our patients too. And for those that are listening, if you're starting to sleep better, you're going to be able to regulate your nervous system better just in general. And so if we can find ways to get people to sleep better, I feel enhancing the GABA system can be really helpful. So these are some of the things that I think about as I'm working out with patients. But as I'm doing that, it's okay. What kind of meditative practice can we start with you? What kind of breath work practice can we start with you? And then looking even deeper metabolically, like B6, magnesium, gut support, and things like that. And then looking even more psychosocial emotionally, what are the things that have led to this sympathetic activation? But I don't know if I answered your question completely, which is I know it can be a difficult road, right? And I think the other piece of this, which we can talk about when you're ready, is that mitochondrial support too.
Yeah, there's one downstream substance that we tend to abuse that goes unspoken. And as I say this, Starbucks is going to send its goons my way, is and I've done this for years, teaching people how to meditate, teaching people how to calm down. And then that sense of peace feels less wiry, and people don't know how to feel without that crack in a can feeling of caffeine. And so oftentimes I struggle with people who start to feel relaxed and then start to over caffeinate because that void just feels strange and empty. So how do you deal with caffeine in this cocktail?
Caffeine is such an interesting compound, right? It's the most widely used nootropic on the planet. So it's brain enhancing, but it's not brain enhancing in the same way as things that are more supportive for the brain. And what I talked about people is that a little bit of caffeine is okay. But what happens with a lot of caffeine, it's like you're paying Peter to pay Paul kind of deal, right? Like the crash is real because what happens with caffeine is that you have this blockage of a receptor in the brain called the adenosine receptor. And adenosine has multiple different roles in the brain. One of the major things it is in the brain or in the body, it has multiple roles in the body. And the brain, one of its major roles is to help you get sleep pressure to make you feel like you're sleepy. So what happens with caffeine is it blocks that adenosine receptor, and then it prevents adenosine from binding. And that's why you feel more wakeful. But what happens is when the caffeine goes away, you get this sort of adenosine crush. And that's why you can get that crash at the end. And so what I always say here to people is that caffeine is one of these molecules that can be used, but it should be used in a more tactical way. If you're using it every day and you're needing more and more of it, and you're using it just so you don't get a headache in the morning, that's a pretty good telltale sign that something needs to change. I was one of those people for many years where I thought, no, I need more caffeine to keep me awake. And then it's a different type of wakefulness too. It's not, they've actually done studies on caffeine. It's not like it improves your memory per se. It just makes you more wakeful. And so there are better things out there to improve your memory, improve your focus that I found over the years. So I think that, and there's also some potentially downstream effects on hormones that can be detrimental if you're having too much. And of course, the neurotransmitter activation, that sympathetic activation that happens is something you have to think about too. I'm with you because I think that so many of us think that we need to do more to be more productive, as opposed to doing less and having a slightly calmer nervous system and being more productive in the things that we do. And I think it's an educational challenge because of the world that we live in. But if we can say, look, you'll find that if your nervous system is down regulated a little bit and you're calmer, that you're going to be able to process information in a more constructive way. So even though you may feel initially that you're not getting as much done, the kind of work that you're going to be getting done is going to be so much better and so much more fulfilling in general, right? Instead of feeling like you're just like putting out fires all the time throughout the day and not getting anything deep done. So I find that it's really a conversation that you have to have with people, because we're just the dings and the notifications and the emails and the triaging. And it's like, it can be very difficult to realize, no, that there's another way to do this. And the first way is to regulate your own nervous system. It's just like being a parent, right? It's the same. I have 4 kids. I always think about this, right? It's if your nervous system is overactive, you're not going to be the best parent that you can be. And this is obvious as a parent, right? You're going to be more frustrated. You're going to yell at your kids, or all the things that you don't want to do. But if you just have a little bit of space there and a little bit of less nervous system activation, your whole relationship with your family is going to change in a very positive way. And it's not subtle. So that's something that's always, I think, helpful for parents as well that are listening. So
I certainly hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. Listen, this is a very important topic. And one of the things that I need you to understand is that if your gut lining is on fire, all of this goes to hell. Your sympathetic nervous system is activated because the foods that you're eating are setting you off. Check the link in the bio, get your gut tested. I am recommending this to all my patients, all my clients, all my students. Once you understand the foods that are setting you off, you take those out, you are now working with less tinder, less TNT. And then, yeah, you meditate. Yeah, you do all these other things, but it starts to stack in your favor when things start to work. Now back to the show. Look, I didn't drink for years. I don't drink anymore. Those years where I would go out and have a couple cocktails, and many years where I just didn't drink. And being in a room as a non-drinker with people who are drinking, it's very stark. You're like, wow, either I'm boring or these people are idiots, or maybe a combo of the two. And if you're the person who's not binging on caffeine, at first you feel like there's something wrong with you because everyone is just loud and impulsive, and the world is on caffeine. And so it could be a lonely place coming off caffeine and finding that calm, peaceful state. But that transitions us, I think, well into the next part of this conversation, which is part of the reason you don't feel like, and you feel like shit and everything's throttling, is because of your neuroception and the safety signaling and your mitochondria saying, yo, I got to slow down my burn. And if you were to fix that, then that natural energy that gets restored feels like nothing. It's nothing better than that. So let's transition into what it looks like when mitochondria are doing their job right.
yeah, so these parts of our cell are a big deal, right? We have quadrillions of mitochondria in our body. I said that right, quadrillions, like so many. Because when I learned about this in school, just like my daughter recently, actually, a couple of weeks ago, she was having me test her on the parts of the cell. You learn that there's a mitochondria in the cell, that there's this one mitochondria, and there's a nucleus, and there's cytoplasm, and there's Golgi apparatus, and endoplasmic reticulum, and all these things. But we don't really realize that we have some cells in our body that have zero mitochondria. Actually, our red blood cells have lost theirs to carry oxygen. And we have other cells in our body that have thousands of mitochondria per cell. The most mitochondria per cell, eggs and sperm. Not surprising. Procreation is a highly energy intensive process. And of course, the egg has actually more than the sperm does because of them being the main driver of all of this, as we all know. The brain is not far behind. And then you have your heart, your liver, your musculoskeletal tissue. And so if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, where are you going to have symptoms? Fertility rates, they're not going up. They're absolutely going down dramatically. Brain function, so mental health disorders, brain fog, concentration issues, fatigue, these are all at their base mitochondrial issues. And they're not going in the downward direction. They're going in the much higher directions. We know now that mental health disorders, even depression, bipolar, can be treated with just focusing on dietary interventions like the ketogenic diet, for example. And why is this, right? Because they are significantly improving mitochondrial function. And so there is about 5 or 6 major drivers of mitochondrial dysfunction. The number one reason out there, it's actually insulin resistance, because 75% of US adults or something crazy like that either have diabetes or are insulin resistant or on a metabolic syndrome, right? And then I should say that 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's a huge number. Only 6% of the US adult population is metabolically healthy. And by metabolically healthy, what I mean there is that so when we talk about metabolic health, we talk about either you can't make energy effectively in the mitochondria, or you can't detox, or you can't rebound from the energy that we make. We talked about earlier how we make energy, ATP. We also make reactive oxygen species. We have to have the ability to neutralize that over time. So 94% of US adults have some element of that mitochondrial dysfunction. And either on the input side, making energy, or the detoxification side of the actual detox from the energy that we make. The number one reason for that is insulin resistance. Because if you have too much too much glucose, too much sugar in the body, this stimulates the system to try to make more energy with all that glucose, and the system starts breaking down over time. The second and most prominent reason inside of insulin resistance is actually what we've been talking about all the time here, is this sympathetic spiral, is this sympathetic activation that's ongoing, that stresses the mitochondria the ways we were talking about earlier in the podcast. Then we have toxins in our environment, anything from infections, things like COVID, for example, was a fantastically terrible mitochondrial stress. And now you have people with post-infectious syndromes related to mitochondrial function, mold infection, Lyme infection. These are all significant mitochondrial dysfunction. And medications, many common medications that many of us are taking on a regular basis. Birth control pills for women, known to make deficiencies in multiple vitamins and minerals that are supporting mitochondrial function, for example. Proton pump inhibitors, even metformin, which is a diabetes drug. This drug is well known to have a destructive capacity on one of the complexes in the mitochondria that help you make energy. And so you have all of this happening that's causing this sort of huge epidemic of mitochondrial dysfunction. And so what is the manifestation of this? This is the things that I was just talking about: brain fog, concentration problems, fertility issues, mental health disorders, cardiac issues, detoxification issues, exercise-induced fatigue. And so the amount of this is staggering, right? And this sympathetic spiral is a big part of it. And it becomes either the chicken or the egg, as I talked about, right? So whether it started off because this is a sympathetic activation causing mitochondrial dysfunction, or because of the other reasons, insulin resistance, toxins in our environment, medications, et cetera, and then you have the sympathetic activation, it becomes this. That's why we're talking about this spiral that people don't realize that they're on. And now really the question that I have oftentimes is, how can we support the mitochondria here, and how can we help reverse some of this pathology, this dysfunction at the same time?
Yeah, and that becomes the Texas two-step, if you will, because you got to de-stress them. If you're eating like an asshole, you should know better by now. You've listened to enough podcasts. The number one reason the good doctor mentioned is insulin resistance. That is a sugar that you are consuming. No one can follow you around and say, don't eat that all day. You got to be mindful of that. But then we go straight into this death spiral. The stress, the neuroassumption, toxins, maybe even leading to some of the sympathetic activation. And so number 2 and 3 kind of blend if they do sometimes. But this becomes a bit of a dance, is what I'm hearing. You have to de-stress, you have to heal the mitochondria, and there's nuance to it. So how to a general audience, like if someone comes into your clinic, you look at all the stuff and you make a plan for kind of a general algorithm for podcast listeners, how do people think about this?
I think we have to take it from a couple different angles. And I think that when it comes from a mitochondrial piece, I also have to understand and really resonate with where people are currently and what they're going to be able to do. In my clinical practice, I'll do a battery of testing. I'll look at mitochondrial function. I'll look at detoxification markers. We'll look at vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors. And this is the whole health optimization medicine framework that I was referring to earlier in the podcast. But again, not everybody's going to be able to do that kind of work. And so what we try to do is see what levers are easy for people to start working with right now. And one of the big ones always is going to be sleep. We talked about this from a sympathetic dominance perspective, but it's also a huge one when it comes to detoxification and mitochondrial function too. And so if we can get people to start sleeping better, that's usually a very easy win, because as soon as somebody starts going from 5 hours of sleep per night, except for my father, who's one of those anomalies that can get away with that, to 7 or 8 hours of sleep, not only are they going to regulate their nervous system better, but their mitochondrial function is going to start improving, because one of the big things that happens when we're sleeping is that we detoxify, right? We are able to get rid of garbage because we have something called the glymphatic system in our brain, which helps pump out toxins from our brain so that we actually can detoxify and make energy more effectively. So sleep is a big one. And so I have a very significant emphasis in my practice of getting people to sleep better. And this is often a wind down routine that doesn't include alcohol, of course, because alcohol is going to trash your sleep. Some of these other things like CBD and CBG and kava, they can be helpful actually at low doses in some people that need them. Having a good wind down routine, then having a sleep routine every night that's as regimented as absolutely possible. So going to sleep at the same time, sleeping in a dark room, even getting a sleep divorce if needed. People get scared about that, but the sleep divorce is basically sleeping in a different room than your partner. There's about 50% of US couples that actually sleep in different beds now. And if you're not willing to do that, at least get different covers than your partner, because even getting different covers in the same bed can actually be transformative to relationships and your own sleep quality. And they've even done studies here looking at if your partner snores, even if you don't think you're waking up, you probably are having these micro awakenings at night that are actually disrupting your sleep entirely. So sleep is one of the big ones because I think people have more control of their sleep than they actually realize. They don't have a lot of control of other things sometimes. They don't have control of their kids or their job, and trying to find ways to de-stress during the day, although I have various things that I would always recommend people to do there. But I think sleep is a big one. And I think the other one that I like to really emphasize is moving. Now, most of us are living sedentary lives these days, and that's why we call it sitting is the new smoking, of course. And if we can get just people to move around a little bit more, it's one of those things where we know that exercise is fantastic for your mitochondria, because your mitochondria have to be stimulated in various ways. They can detox better, and it's really great overall. But even if just starting to move around a little bit more, getting walks around the day, taking your flights of stairs up your house if you have them, or taking the stairs instead of the elevator. These two things, I found that these really are what I would call cornerstone habits. And this is a phrase that's been around a long time. A guy named Charles Duhigg wrote a book called Habits. He was a New York Times correspondent, still is. I love the book. And I always recommend it to my patients because it's a super easy way of thinking about habits and how we can make them. So my big thing with people and my patients before starting on the supplement dietary lifestyle journey, oftentimes is to look at these two levers as sleep and movement as being my big ones, because people don't realize how much more control of these two things than they really have. And then when we can start really hammering in and doubling down on these as being really levers for them, they become cornerstone habits for everything else they do. And the definition of cornerstone habit, by the way, is that something you do one thing, one habit, which snowballs into a number of other habits that go along with it. And movement and exercise is a big one, because if you start moving more, you're going to start wanting to eat more, or eat better. Typically, you're going to start wanting to regulate your relationships a little bit better too, and your own space. There's other ways to do this, but like from an easy access perspective, looking at your sleep routines and looking at moving are the two biggest ones that I find.
It's funny, sleep, I have a long history with sleep medicine, used to run sleep labs, and it's almost like we're looking down a fractal right now, because a lot of the things that we have to do to deal with sleep involve dealing with the sympathetic flush to begin with. And so it seems like a highly leveraged place to solve the same problem in the most efficient place first.
Fractals are everywhere, right? This is the Fibonacci sequences. This is the golden
Mm,
rule. And if you can find these sort of base fractals, Dr. Ted, who I work with, likes to talk about this a lot. And the base fractals, he's also a longtime meditator like you, Pedram, and he taught me a lot over the years. And the base fractal is in everything, and in meditation and those kinds of practices, and understanding the way we think of ourselves as this self itself, right? In the sense of that we have an ego, and then this should be running us. If you can take it and then the fractals of all that, understanding that no, we're just selfing ourselves into existence all the time at this very moment. These are the kinds of conversations that are really great to have with my patients and with you, of course, as somebody who knows this stuff very well. Because if we can get to that base level for people, it's like that movie Inception, right?
mm,
Everybody knows that movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, which is if you really have to get that person to believe that they came up with this on their own in some capacity, right? And if you can give that sort of that base fractal in there, then everything else changes from there because it came from inside of, them, whatever
mm.
that definition is. And that's what we're always trying to drive at here, I think.
Yeah, I think sleep's a really great place to start too, because there's a lot of noise during the day. There's plenty of distractions. Other people are banging on things and a lot of things to be done. And then at night, when everyone else is sleeping and you're staring at the ceiling, feeling sorry for yourself, you become pretty brutally aware of your nervous system
Your mind, right?
and your
Yeah. Well,
mind.
yeah. And that's those 70,000 thoughts. That's why I always say to my patients, don't believe everything you think, please. Like your mind is completely crazy and completely out of control sometimes. That's what minds are. They're not supposed to keep us, they're trying to keep us alive until tomorrow. They're not trying to keep us optimized and healthy and happy, if you want to use that word, right? They're really programmed for survival. That's what the ego is all about. And where is it most prominent, right? Is in the evening when your mind won't let you go to bed, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. When all you can hear is the monkey mind and you're like, damn, what is going on up there?
Yeah.
So this idea of the reactive our oxygen species or the ROS coming out and choking the engine. Some people are just like, just take a bunch of antioxidants, right? Problem solved. And so there's also this weird vector reality that pharma created that the nutraceutical companies followed because it's good for business. And it's never really one to one, is it? But people think that the supplement's going to solve everything. So I'd love to just spend a minute on that.
Our biology is very smart, but it's also very easily duped in the sense that we think that this one thing is going to help us cognitively. One of the things that I grew up with this framework, my father being a chiropractor, which is if you allow the body to heal itself, it will heal itself over time, right? If you give it the right tools and techniques and practices. But this is often not chasing one supplement or one practice. And that's the challenge for us because we always want that one thing that's going to shift. Now, we can sometimes get glimmers of hope with various things that we do. But when I talk to my patients, I'm like, look, it's not going to be one supplement. It's not going to be one change in your diet. It's not going to be one change in your mindset. It's this ecosystem that you create. And as you mentioned earlier, it's these fractals that you make that can be then exponentially manifested in various ways on how we change and live our life. It's just like being a meditator. Eventually, you have to stop thinking that meditation is what you need to do to meditate, right? It becomes a crutch on its own, right? And so there's always a push in various meditation circles that you have to stop meditating because meditation's a crutch because you have to meditate to be in a meditative state, right?
Mm.
No, the goal is to be in more of a meditative state without always being in your own positions and like the lotus flower stuff, right? It's like a walking and daily meditative practice. The same thing with your health. It should become an inherent ecosystem that you create over time that becomes more intuitive, that becomes more flowing with the day. But we have to get back there. Like it's not easy for us to get back there. So using wearables, using technology, like using supplementation can be super helpful at certain times. But always bringing people back to the ecosystem here is that you're providing inputs so that you can become more intuitively understanding of how your physiology is at any one moment. And so for me, it's always that it's a little bit of a dance because I use supplements all the time in practice. I use dietary inventions. I use cool technologies and cool practices as well. But the goal is that just like with meditation, eventually none of that stuff should be as necessary most of the time. And that you should be able to have that base, that foundation that's going to be with you no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, some people walk in, you got to throw the kitchen sink at them,
Yeah.
and we're all a work in progress. So, look, wherever you're at right now listening to this, the moral of the story is there's hope. and there's an operating system that's probably healthier, right? That you just gotta look. I'm a stark believer of you program the mind, because if not, it'll just run off into chaos on its own, right? So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, you're driving, and your next breath puts you back in the driver's seat. So look, I love this conversation. I really love the breadth of it, and I also love this ecosystem that you've created around saying, listen, this is high, this is low, this is how you adjust. And I know, and we're running out of time, but you're doing like cool stuff around HBOT, you're using methylene blue, like just some of the interventions that you've found helpful in this ecosystem. If we could just spend the last couple of minutes on that.
Yeah. Yeah. One big lever that I've been using for the last 4 or 5 years is this very crazy compound called methylene blue. And it's very unusual. It's very blue. It's not from the ground initially, or originally it was a synthetic material that was made back in the 1870s, like a long time ago. But we now know that as long as you get clean quality stuff that's not contaminated with heavy metals, you really have a fantastic capacity to support mitochondrial function now. I use it a lot now because I find that what it can do is it gives enough support to the mitochondria at low doses, not a lot, like 425 milligrams, like not a lot, 4 to 25 milligrams as a dosing range. It gives them enough support so that their energy's a little bit better, that their detoxification's a little bit better. And then they can start doing some of the harder work of starting to move a little bit better. Think about their sleep routines, optimize their relationships. Like there's a few things that I think you and I are always thinking about this as clinicians, is what are these levers that we can help pull with our patients that will start on them on or kickstart this process. And methylene blue has been one of these really great ones. And I just use very low doses of it. And I slowly titrate the dose over time to support mitochondrial function. Higher doses can be anti-infective, can be significantly helpful as something with severe mitochondrial stress. But in general, like lower doses are the way to go. You have to make sure you're just getting clean sources because it can be contaminated along the way. And I've had a lot of great success helping with the sympathetic spiral because the GABA system you can leverage with really cool compounds, as I mentioned, and strategies like breath work and meditation and others over time. But that enhancement of the mitochondria using methylene blue is a really great additional strategy at the same time, so that people don't have that sort of, the way I would describe it is letdown, like the letdown that can happen without the support that you're also getting on the mitochondria. So methylene blue could be really great there. And over the years, I've been involved in hyperbaric medicine for a long time. And hyperbaric therapy, this particular technology is really great because it can help enhance the amount of energy that you bring in the system. It can help decrease inflammation, create new blood vessels. It can help with mitochondrial function, help treats infection, it releases stem cells and all these things. But if your system's in the sympathetic spiral, it's not the time to use hyperbaric therapy, because what's going to happen is that you're going to bring more oxygen in the system, and that's going to create more stress. Okay. And that spiral can get, and I've seen this, I've seen people that go into the chamber and feel terrible afterwards. And this is often because they have so much stress and inflammation that you really want to take a step back. And over the years, I've become much more realistic with understanding when people really would benefit in going in the chamber. Typically, it's 3 to 6 months after optimization strategies to optimize vitamins, minerals, nutrients, cofactors, sympathetic dominance, and then using hyperbaric therapy as a way to accelerate healing, accelerate recovery, blood vascular growth. Absolutely possible. And so it's really great as an acute technology for acute stress, acute trauma, acute inflammation. This is when I can use like an educationally throwing shit at the wall strategy at the same time as hyperbaric therapy to support somebody along the way, using methylene blue, using things that are going to GABAergically stimulate many other things at the same time. But if there's more time, it's more of a long-term question as to how we can optimize somebody using hyperbaric therapy for a concussion, like a long-term concussion or a stroke or mild cognitive impairment, chronic infection. Then you want to optimize the system on the ground as much as you can first. Then using hyperbaric therapy, that's the best modality. And then I often use things in combination. Like I'll use a little bit of methylene blue. I'll use red light therapy because red light actually synergizes with methylene blue, for example. Then I'll put them in a hyperbaric chamber, and then I'll get them on some detox technologies afterwards, using a sauna or something like that afterwards to help with detoxification. So there's a lot of cool integrations of multiple technologies and practices that you can do. In the end, these are really great ways to make things and accelerate them faster. But it's a matter of when is the right time oftentimes. And with hyperbaric therapy, it's often not right now. It's typically, let's get your sympathetic nervous system down-regulated. Let's optimize some mitochondrial function, and then we can approach it that way. So in my world, I call myself a conductor of all things health optimization. But the base, the foundation, those fractals, as you mentioned, are the most important. And then from there, we can build.
Really appreciate that. Yeah, and listen, I know a lot of guys that bought these big expensive tanks and got to keep them full. And so, look, clinics are also businesses. Just make sure you feel good coming out of one. If not, it's probably not the right time for you.
I got disinvited from a lecture that I was supposed to give. The title of it was "Please Don't Put Them in a Chamber." I don't own a hyperbaric company. My father actually does in New York. It's called Hyperbaric Medical Solutions, and it's fantastic, right? I think, but we always have these conversations, and how I always teach people that are involved in this field is we will do them and us a better service if we tell them, you know what, wait 3 months, work with a provider to optimize on this side, and then you can see so much more of a benefit. Now, that's a challenge. I get that. Even being in a hyperbaric chamber is actually very de-stressing for people. I will say that, because all of a sudden you don't have your phones, you don't have things that are pinging you all the time, and you're just relaxing in the chamber. So in some cases, like from mild units, for example, no harm, no foul. Go in for 30 or 60 minutes and keep your phone out of the chamber, and you're going to feel great. Feel much better when you come out, probably because you had less stress for that 30 minutes or an hour ahead of time. So there's always a dance here. It's always a nuance. There's never like a one size fits all. And that's why it's always important to have these more nuanced conversations, which I appreciate.
Yeah, same here. Scott, you're great. Tell people where to find you, how to find your stuff.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. So if you're interested in learning more about me, you can check out my personal website. It's drscottsherr.com, DRSCOTTSHERR. You'll find my consulting there, my health optimization medicine practice, which is something I do via telemedicine here in Colorado where I live. I have a couple companies. I have the nonprofit organization that trains practitioners. So if you're a practitioner and you're interested in more training and you're looking for a foundational approach that's optimizing health rather than focusing on disease or even root causes of disease, which is more of the functional medicine side, you can check it out at homehope.org. And we have a 7-module certification. Our primary module is something called metabolomics, which is really the foundation of everything that I do in clinical practice. And a lot of that we've been talking about here. If you're interested in some of the ways to help yourself right now, downregulate your nervous system, optimize mitochondrial function, we have a company called Troscriptions. It's a company that makes products that can help right now. We have something called Trocom and Troz, for example, that are working on that anxiety, stress, sympathetic loop that we talked about. And we have a couple of that on the methylene blue side as well, something called Just Blue, something called Blue Canatine as well. My consideration here, of course, is always that we do what's best for you. You don't have to go and buy our products, but these are really things that can be very helpful along the way. And that's why I use them in clinical practice. That's why I care about them and care about this ecosystem we've developed. And you can also check out a company called One Base Health. This is a company that makes products in the technology space, saunas, hyperbaric chambers, and an ecosystem of connecting them all together via software. So if you're interested, go check that out on Instagram at Dr. Scott Sherr, at Transcriptions, at homehope.org, and at One Base Health.
I'll put links to this in the show notes. Really appreciate you, Doc. Keep up the good work. We'll have you back.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that. I got links in the bio for all things that the good doctor talked about. Look at your life. Look at the areas in your life that are adding to this sympathetic stress, and look at what you can do to bring it down day by day as part of your rituals. Test your gut lining. I got links over here. I'll have links to all the stuff the doc's talking about. But the moral of the story is, if you don't take action, talk is cheap. It's time for you to move on this.